Please be seated. So, I'm going to start out today talking a little bit about photography. Now, photography is an interesting mix of art and science. So, for my camera here, which I remember my camera but not my batteries, I have on here right now a 35 millimeter lens. You can see it's kind of short, right? Now, back in the olden days, that is like 50 years ago, the cameras and the lenses were so expensive that only the most expensive cameras had interchangeable lenses. And so most people just had a 35 millimeter camera, which you've probably heard of, right? 35 millimeter. So this is a great multi-purpose lens. It has a wide field of view. So that means that if it was on and I looked through it, I could get most of the sanctuary in the shot. And so it's nice that way. The downside to it is if I wanted to zoom, I have to zoom with my feet, which means that if I wanted to do a close-up, I would have to come in this way in order to zoom. And that's how the 35 millimeter works. Now, I'm not going to swap the lenses here, but I am going to pull out a different lens. Okay, now this is probably my nicer lens because it's the one I use the most. It's a zoom lens. Now, at one end, it's just below the 35, and at the other end, it goes up to about 100. And what that means, basically, is I don't have to use my feet to zoom. I just twist the lens on this one. And that's all it does, is it can do 35, and it can do a little bit closer. This other lens here, this should be bigger if I had a lot more money, is a telephoto lens. And what you're used to seeing these actually is wildlife photographers and sports photographers. And a good telephoto lens is usually about this long, right? And it's a lot bigger. And what a telephoto lens does is it allows you to zoom from very far away to get a close-up shot. Because, of course, the photographer can't actually be on the football field. And the photographer doesn't actually want to stand next to the bear to get the photo, right? So you need a good lens that can zoom in. Now, a telephoto lens, however, cannot zoom out unless you use your feet and go like a half mile in that direction, because it's really designed to get a nice shot of something really far away. Interestingly, the reason why we have all of these lenses is to try and replicate the abilities of the human eye. The eye has a multifocal superlens. Within certain limitations, I mean, we're not eagles, a normal eye can focus close to read the fine print or take in the whole horizon and a gorgeous sunset. But what we don't notice is that the brain is actually deciding what we see. The brain takes in the information from the eye, but it doesn't give us exactly what the eye sees. Unless we really pay attention, we don't notice that when we're actually looking at the sunset, the rest of the horizon is actually a little blurry. Only if we scan our eyes back and forth do we get the whole image, but our brain makes us think the whole thing is clear, right? Now maybe you've played the game where you focus on your finger in front of your nose and then focus on something in the background and watch as different parts of your vision blur. And if you haven't, I invite you to do it right now. If you put your finger up close and you can focus on this, you'll notice the background gets blurry. And then if you focus on the background, you'll notice your finger gets blurry. But if you kind of put your finger in the middle and scan back and forth, you'll think it's all in focus. That's where your brain is filling in your vision separately from what your eyes are actually picking up. In fact, this is why the eye can be tricked by optical illusions. It's not actually the eye that's tricked. It's the details that the brain fills in for us. The illusion is the story that our brain tells us about what the eye is seeing. So, for example, if we look at this image, it looks like zigzag lines. But in reality, all the horizontal lines are parallel. This is our brain tricking us. Okay? Now, regardless of the camera and the lens, whether you're using a phone camera or a nice camera setup, the photographer is trying to tell a story with the photo. See, the camera and the lens just use physics to change the elements of the photo. Depending on the choices made, the light may be hard or soft, the picture may be zoomed in or out, the background may be focused or blurry. But what we're trying to replicate is more than just physics. We're trying to convey our feelings, the atmosphere, or a story in our pictures. Because the photographer is more than an eye with a lens. We are thinking and feeling beings. Think about it, even if you're just taking a selfie, if you do that, there's a story there, right? Where you are, who you're with, what you're feeling in that moment that you wanted to capture it with a selfie. Whenever we see the world around us, we have a lens that is more than just the zooming and focusing one. Our lenses include knowledge, experience, emotions, beliefs, and our personal priorities. And because our brain likes to be helpful, sometimes it provides details from memories that color the image. If it reminds you of something sad, if it reminds you of a time you were angry, if it reminds you of a time you were scared. But unlike a camera, we cannot remove the lens because it's held deep in our brain and most of it is unconscious. However, we can become aware that we have a lens and be curious about how it's coloring the story of our vision. Other times, our feelings can cause our personal lens to get very, very zoomed in, especially during emotional turmoil. This is in part because our brain is trying to take care of us. During a crisis, it's important to be focused on the immediacy of the situation. But sometimes we get stuck in our emotional lens and struggle to see the bigger picture even after the crisis has passed. We often refer to this as having tunnel vision or wearing blinders. Our lens is so zoomed in on whatever is causing us distress that we can't even see the people on our right and our left who may be trying to help us. Maybe this is what happened to the disciples in the gospel story. They were so focused on the potential crisis of the storm, they couldn't see beyond their own fear. And maybe when you hear this very familiar story, you already have a story for it too. What's the lens that you apply when you hear this story? Maybe you consider miracles to be idle tales. Maybe miracle stories just don't feel relevant anymore. Maybe you felt like God has failed you in the past. Maybe this story just feels a little bit too Greek, a little too deus ex machina. Like the disciples, most of us already have a way of seeing this story. We've already figured out a way to fit it into our comfortable understanding of the world where it doesn't rock the boat too much. Which brings us to Jesus' very important questions. Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? If that question feels accusatory or makes you feel a little defensive, that's okay. It's probably the way it was read to you in the past. This is part of the lens that comes from your own knowledge and experience of the story. I wonder, though, if we can be curious about that lens. Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? For the disciples, I wonder if they were so zoomed in on the storm and their fear that they were unable to let go of the sense of crisis. Maybe they feel wronged. Maybe they blame Jesus for their fear. Maybe they are feeding off of each other's outrage and spinning up into an emotional storm of their own. The story they're telling themselves is that they almost died and Jesus did nothing. We've all been there, right? With coworkers griping about injustice of management, family members venting about the insensitivity of some relative, or parents complaining about the politics of the school PTO. Into this maelstrom of strong emotions, though, Jesus calmly wonders, why are you afraid, friends? Have you still no faith in me? From Jesus' zoomed out perspective, you might be asking, did you notice me casting out those demons? Did you notice me as I healed all those people? Did you think the boat would capsize with me in it? Were you so focused on the storm and the fear that you forgot Jesus was in the boat? What story were the disciples telling themselves? What stories do we tell ourselves? What lenses are limiting our vision? When we are in this holy place, I think it's easier to see the work of God in the world around us. We actually invite it here. We choose the 35mm camera lens. We cultivate an atmosphere where we want to feel expansive and recognize the sacred all around us. But when we go out into the world, that lens often falls away, leaving us buffeted by both the winds of everyday life and the storms of unexpected crises. We do live in frightening times. The challenges are real, from the daily concerns about budgets and illness and loss and isolation, to the societal changes of war, pandemic, poverty, and injustice. Fear is a powerful motivator and distractor, enticing us to spend hours contemplating the worst. And unfortunately, activists and news producers and politicians know this, just how enticing it is. So they shape their messages to draw us into that storm of outrage where they can manipulate us into a zoomed-in, crisis-style reaction to every issue of the day. But the reality is, they are giving us an illusion, a partial view of the world that is skewed according to a particular perspective. So Jesus is trying to break the spell, asking, who do you trust? Are we going to invest our energy and all the things that drive our fears? Or look around and remember that there is only one Lord? Do we let the fearmongers of the world make us feel small and powerless? Or do we carry the knowledge of the power of the resurrection, the resurrected Lord, out into the world with us? So, I leave you with these questions today. Are you going to focus on the illusions? Or are you going to focus on the cross?